I applauded when the school nurse called CPS on my wife. The Child Protective Services investigator sitting across from me at my kitchen table stopped writing mid-sentence and looked up with an expression that mixed confusion and concern. Her name was Christine Lawson, and she had introduced herself with the practiced sympathy of someone used to dealing with devastated families. But my reaction to her opening question had clearly thrown her off script. "Mr. Holloway, I need to make sure I heard you correctly. You said you applauded when Ms. Whitmore from Riverside Elementary contacted our office about your children." I nodded and felt that same rush of relief I had experienced 3 days ago when Miss Whitmore had called me at work to warn me that she was filing a mandatory report. I actually clapped out loud when she told me. Startled my coworkers. They thought I had lost my mind. Christine set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. That is not the typical response we see from parents when CPS gets involved. Most people are defensive or angry or scared. You understand this is a serious investigation into allegations of child abuse? My wife Victoria would be home in 20 minutes. She had a late appointment with a client and thought I was here alone waiting for a plumber. Instead, I was sitting with a CPS investigator and about to explain why her phone call to report abuse was the best thing that had happened to our family in 3 years. I understand completely, and I need you to listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you because my wife is extremely intelligent and very good at manipulating people. She is a licensed family therapist with 15 years of experience. She knows exactly what to say to make herself look like a loving mother, and me look like a vindictive husband making false accusations. She has done this before. Christine picked up her pen again, but her posture had changed. She was no longer just going through the motions of a routine investigation. "Tell me everything." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I had been building for 8 months. My wife has been systematically abusing our children, not in ways that leave obvious marks most of the time. She is too smart for that. But she controls every aspect of their lives through fear and punishment. She isolates them from anyone who might question her methods. And she has been gaslighting me and anyone else who raises concerns by claiming I am the one with anger issues. I showed Christine the first video. It was recorded from a hidden camera I had installed in our living room after Lucas came to me crying about something his mother had done and then refused to repeat it, because he said Mommy told him Daddy would get in trouble if anyone knew. The footage showed Victoria standing over our 11-year-old son while he knelt on rice for 30 minutes as punishment for forgetting his homework folder at school. Lucas was crying and begging to stand up. Victoria's voice was calm and almost pleasant. "This is what happens when you are irresponsible. You need to learn that actions have consequences. Your father would let you be lazy and fail at life. I love you enough to teach you discipline." When Lucas finally stood up, his knees were bleeding and patterned with indentations. Victoria made him clean up the rice himself and told him if he told anyone about their special discipline time, she would make sure Daddy went to jail for being mean to Mommy. I watched Christine's face as she processed what she was seeing. "How long has this been happening?" I swiped to the next video. This one showed Victoria forcing our 9-year-old daughter Ava to stand in an ice-cold shower for 15 minutes because she had talked back. Ava was shaking violently and begging to get out. Victoria stood outside the shower fully dressed and checked her watch periodically. "You will learn respect. Your father lets you act wild, but I will not tolerate disrespect in my house." The audio was crystal clear. Victoria's voice never rose above conversational volume. She sounded rational and controlled. That was part of what made it so disturbing. This has been escalating over the past 3 years. It started small. Timeouts that lasted too long. Restrictions on food as punishment. Excessive criticism. But Victoria is methodical. She pushed boundaries gradually to see what she could get away with. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, our children were terrified of her and convinced that this was normal, because Mommy was a therapist who helped families, and she must know what good parenting looks like. Christine was taking notes rapidly now. "Have you reported this before?" That was the question I had been dreading, because the answer made me look complicit. I tried twice. The first time was 10 months ago when I found bruises on Lucas's legs. Victoria said he had fallen during soccer practice, but I knew he had not been to practice that week because Victoria had canceled it as punishment for his grades. So I took him to our pediatrician and asked the doctor to examine him and document what she found. The doctor agreed the bruises looked concerning and said she would file a report. But then Victoria showed up at the office before I left and somehow convinced the doctor that I was exaggerating because I disagreed with Victoria's parenting style. She used all her therapeutic language and professional credentials. She told the doctor I had untreated anger issues and was projecting onto her. The doctor ended up not filing the report and suggested we attend couples counseling. I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. Victoria is very good at appearing reasonable and concerned while making me look unstable. Christine looked up from her notes. You said you tried twice. What was the second time? I pulled up another set of photos on my phone. 4 months ago, I contacted CPS directly. I had started documenting everything by then. I had photos and videos and a detailed log of incidents. I called the hotline and filed a report myself against my own wife. An investigator came to the house 3 days later. Victoria knew he was coming because she intercepted the notification letter. She had time to prepare. When he arrived, she was warm and welcoming. She gave him a tour of our beautiful home. She showed him the children's rooms, which are always clean because Victoria requires military-level organization. She introduced him to Lucas and Ava, who had been coached on exactly what to say. She presented herself as a devoted mother who worked hard to provide structure for her children while dealing with a husband who undermined her parenting. I felt my hands shaking as I remembered that day. Then she brought out her own documentation. A journal she had been keeping that detailed all my alleged angry outbursts and violent threats. Complete fabrications, but written in the clinical language of a mental health professional assessing a dangerous situation. Christine stopped writing. Did the investigator believe her? I nodded and felt the familiar knot of frustration in my chest. He spent 90 minutes with us. He spent maybe 10 of those minutes talking to me. The rest was Victoria showing him how wonderful she was and how concerned she was about my mental state and how she was trying to protect the children from my instability. By the time he left, he basically told me that making false reports about a spouse during a custody dispute was illegal, and I should focus on getting help for my anger problem. There was no custody dispute. I had not filed for divorce. But Victoria had planted that narrative so effectively that he assumed I was the vindictive spouse trying to weaponize CPS. The memory of that failure still burned. After he left, Victoria sat the children down and told them that Daddy had tried to get Mommy in trouble by lying to the police. She said if Daddy ever tried that again, she would have to leave and take them somewhere Daddy could never find them. Lucas had nightmares for weeks. Christine was quiet for a long moment. That investigator made serious errors in judgment, but I need to understand something. If your previous attempts to report this were dismissed, why did you applaud when the school nurse called? What makes you think this time will be different? I pulled up the most recent photos on my phone. Because this time, Victoria did not have advance warning and time to prepare her defense. This time, the report came from a mandatory reporter who saw something Victoria could not explain away. And this time I have 8 months of documentation that I have kept completely secret from Victoria. I showed Christine the photos from 3 days ago. Lucas had come home from school with a handprint bruise on his upper arm. Victoria had grabbed him hard enough to leave distinct finger marks because he had scored poorly on a math quiz. Ms. Whitmore had seen the bruise when Lucas reached up to answer a question in class. She had pulled him aside and asked how it happened. Lucas had been trained to lie. He said he fell. But Ms. Whitmore had been teaching for 20 years and knew what defensive injuries looked like versus what grip marks looked like. Ms. Whitmore took photos and called me first as a courtesy before she filed her mandatory report. She said she had been concerned about Lucas for months. His grades had dropped dramatically. He flinched when anyone raised their voice. He had stopped participating in activities he used to love. She said she had tried to talk to Victoria at parent-teacher conferences, but Victoria had been defensive and dismissive. She blamed Lucas for being lazy and said she was working hard to correct his behavioral problems at home. I felt my throat tighten with gratitude for Ms. Whitmore's persistence. When she told me she was filing a report, I started crying. Then I started clapping, because finally, someone with authority had seen something Victoria could not talk her way out of. Finally, there was documentation from someone other than me. Finally, someone was going to investigate who had not already been manipulated by my wife's professional persona. Christine met my eyes. I need to see everything you have documented, and I need you to understand that if what you are telling me is true, your wife will face serious consequences. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Lucas kneeling on rice with bleeding knees, about Ava shaking in a freezing shower, about our 6-year-old son Ethan who had started wetting the bed again because he was so anxious about following all of Victoria's rules. I am not just prepared for it. I am desperate for it. My children are living in terror in their own home. I have been trying to protect them while gathering evidence to prove what was happening. But every day I failed to get Victoria stopped was another day my kids suffered. So yes, when Ms. Whitmore called CPS, I applauded because it meant my children might finally be safe. Christine stood up, and I heard the front door open. Victoria was home early. I watched Christine's expression shift into professional neutrality as my wife walked into the kitchen and stopped dead when she saw the stranger at our table. "Nathan, what is going on? Who is this?" Her voice was measured and controlled, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Christine introduced herself and showed her identification. "Mrs. Holloway, I am Christine Lawson from Child Protective Services. We received a report of concerning injuries on your son Lucas. I need to ask you some questions and I need to speak with your children." Victoria's face cycled through several micro-expressions before settling on concerned confusion. "Injuries? What are you talking about? Lucas is fine. He is upstairs doing homework." She turned to me with what would have looked like genuine bewilderment to anyone who did not know her. "Nathan, did you call CPS? What is happening?" This was the moment I had been preparing for. The moment where Victoria would try to control the narrative and paint me as the problem. But this time, I had an audience who was already primed with evidence. I did not call them. Lucas's teacher noticed bruises and filed a mandatory report. Christine has been here for 30 minutes, and I have been showing her the documentation I have been keeping of your abuse. The word abuse hung in the air, and Victoria's mask slipped for just a second. I saw rage flash across her face before she reassembled her expression into wounded shock. "Abuse? Nathan, how could you say that? I love our children. Everything I do is to help them succeed." She turned to Christine with tears forming in her eyes. "My husband and I have been having disagreements about parenting. I believe in structure and discipline. He thinks I am too strict, but I would never hurt my children. Never." She was good. Her voice trembled at exactly the right moments. Her body language screamed of a woman falsely accused by a vindictive husband. If I had not spent 3 years watching her perform for various audiences, I might have believed her myself. But Christine had seen the videos. She had seen Victoria's calm face while Lucas bled on rice and Ava shook in ice water. "Mrs. Holloway, I need you to bring Lucas downstairs so I can speak with him privately. Then I will need to speak with your other children as well." Victoria's tears stopped as quickly as they had started. "I want to call my lawyer first. I know my rights. You cannot question my children without my consent." Christine's voice remained professional but firm. "Actually, as a mandatory reporter, I can speak with children when there are allegations of abuse. You can have an attorney present for your own interview, but the children will be questioned separately." Victoria looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. "Nathan, please tell her. This is all a misunderstanding. Tell her you made a mistake." Her voice had taken on a pleading quality that would have worked on me 2 years ago before I understood how completely she had been manipulating me. "I cannot tell her that because it would be a lie. I have been protecting you for too long, and it almost destroyed our children." "I am done protecting you." Victoria's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you have just done. You are going to regret this." Christine stepped between us. "Mrs. Holloway, I need you to bring Lucas down now. Any attempt to interfere with this investigation will be documented and used against you." Victoria stared at me for a long moment before turning and walking upstairs. I could hear her voice as she called for Lucas. Her tone was sweet and gentle. "Honey, can you come downstairs? There is someone who wants to talk to you. Remember what we discussed about telling the truth to strangers who ask questions." Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, and I watched my son's face cycle through confusion and fear. He looked at me and then at Christine, and I saw him trying to calculate what was happening. Victoria walked him down with her hand on his shoulder, and I could see her fingers pressing hard into his skin, a reminder of what happened when he did not follow her rules. Christine saw it too. "Lucas, my name is Christine, and I work for an organization that makes sure kids are safe and healthy. Your teacher, Ms. Whitmore, noticed you had some bruises and wanted to make sure everything was okay at home. Can you tell me how you got the bruises on your arm?" Lucas glanced at Victoria, whose face was perfectly composed. "I fell." His voice was flat and rehearsed. Christine knelt down so she was at his eye level. "Lucas, I want you to know that nothing you say here will get you in trouble. Your job right now is just to tell the truth. Sometimes the truth is scary to tell, but I promise I am here to listen and help." "Can you show me your arm?" Lucas hesitated and then slowly rolled up his sleeve. The bruises were darker now than they had been 3 days ago. 4 distinct finger marks wrapped around his bicep. Christine took photos with her department-issued camera. "Those look painful. Did you fall on something that left marks shaped exactly like fingers?" Lucas's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to go to him, but Christine had instructed me to stay back. "I do not remember." His voice broke, and I realized he was terrified. Terrified of what Victoria would do if he told the truth. Terrified of what would happen if he lied, trapped between impossible choices that no 11-year-old should face. Christine spoke very gently. "Lucas, I am going to talk to you in private now. Just you and me. Your mom and dad are going to wait in the other room. Is that okay?" Lucas looked at Victoria, and I saw the fear spike. Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet. "Of course that is fine. Lucas knows he can tell the truth. We have nothing to hide." But her eyes were sending Lucas a very different message. A message that said he better stick to the story or face consequences. Christine led Lucas into the living room and closed the door. Victoria turned on me immediately. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You have destroyed this family. Do you understand that? When that investigator finishes talking to Lucas and realizes you have been coaching him to lie about me, I will make sure you never see your children again. I have 3 years of documentation about your anger and instability. I have a professional reputation. I have colleagues who will testify about your erratic behavior. You just ended your relationship with your children because you could not handle the fact that I am a better parent than you." I kept my voice steady, even though I wanted to scream. "You have been torturing our kids for 3 years and calling it discipline. You have been using your professional credentials to hide abuse, and you have been documenting false allegations against me to use as a weapon if anyone ever challenged you. But I have been documenting the truth. And this time, you do not get to talk your way out of it." Victoria laughed, and it was cold and bitter. "We will see who has the more convincing evidence." The living room door opened 20 minutes later, and Christine emerged with Lucas. My son's face was red and blotchy from crying. Christine's expression was grim. "Mrs. Holloway, I need you to bring your other children down immediately. Mr. Holloway, I need you to come with me outside for a moment." We stepped onto the front porch, and Christine kept her voice low. "Lucas told me everything. The kneeling on rice, the ice showers, the food restrictions, the threats. He said he has been lying to protect you because your wife told him that if anyone found out about her discipline methods, you would be arrested for not stopping her, and then she would have full custody and make the punishments worse." My legs went weak, and I grabbed the porch railing. "He has been protecting me?" Christine nodded. "He said he loves you and knows you have been trying to help, but he was too scared of what would happen if he told the truth. But when I told him that you were the one who had been documenting everything and trying to get help, he broke down. He wants this to stop. He wants his mother to get help. And he wants to know if he and his siblings can stay with you." I was crying now and did not care. "Whatever needs to happen, I will do it. I just need my kids to be safe." Christine pulled out her phone. "I am calling my supervisor, and we are going to do emergency removals of all 3 children tonight. Based on Lucas's testimony and your documentation, there is clear and present danger. Your wife will not have unsupervised contact with the children pending a full investigation and court hearing. We will need to place them temporarily, but given your cooperation and the fact that you are the protective parent, We can likely place them with you under a safety plan." She paused, and her voice softened. "Mr. Holloway, I need to tell you that Lucas also said something else. He said his mother had another family before, that sometimes she talks about her other children who did not appreciate everything she did for them and had to go live somewhere else. Did you know your wife had children from a previous relationship?" Ice flooded my veins. "No, she told me she had never been married before. She said I was her first serious relationship." Christine's expression darkened. "We are going to need to investigate that. If your wife had previous children who were removed from her care and she hid that from you when you had children together, that is a major issue." She made several calls while I stood on the porch trying to process this new information. Victoria had other children. Children she had lost. Children she had never mentioned in 8 years of marriage. How much of my wife's life was a fabrication? Christine's supervisor arrived within 30 minutes with 2 other CPS workers. They questioned Ava and Ethan separately, while Victoria sat in the kitchen with a lawyer she had called who kept telling her not to answer questions. I sat in the dining room and listened to my 6-year-old son describe how Mommy made him stand in the corner for hours if he forgot to put his toys away exactly right. How she would take away meals if he cried too much. How she told him that Daddy was weak, and if Ethan grew up to be weak too, he would fail at life. Ava described the ice showers and being locked in her room for entire weekends as punishment for minor infractions. She described how Victoria had her practice lying to doctors and teachers about any injuries. How Victoria would quiz her on the cover stories and punish her if she did not remember them correctly. By the time the interviews were finished, it was almost midnight. Christine came to me with paperwork. "All 3 children are being placed in your care under an emergency safety plan. Your wife must leave the home immediately and have no contact with the children except supervised visits pending the outcome of the investigation. She will face criminal charges for child abuse. The district attorney will be reviewing the evidence and Lucas's testimony will be central to the case." She handed me several documents to sign. "You did the right thing by documenting everything. Without that evidence, this would be much harder to prove. Your children are very lucky you fought for them even when the system failed the first times you tried." I signed everything with shaking hands. Victoria was escorted out of the house by police who had arrived to serve her with an emergency protection order. She looked back at me as she left, and her expression promised retribution. But for the first time in 3 years, I was not afraid of her. My children were safe. That was all that mattered. The next weeks were chaos. Lucas, Ava, and Ethan stayed home from school while I arranged for therapy and tried to help them process everything that had happened. They were traumatized and confused. They had spent years believing their mother's version of reality, where her extreme discipline was love, and my attempts to protect them were weakness. Undoing that programming took time and professional help. Dr. Jennifer Osborne specialized in family trauma, and she met with us individually and as a group. She helped the children understand that what Victoria had done was abuse, not discipline, that they were not bad kids who deserved punishment, that their father had been trying to protect them even when it seemed like he was not doing enough. Lucas struggled the most because he was old enough to understand how much danger they had been in and felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. Ava had nightmares about ice water and woke up screaming several times a week. Ethan regressed and became clingy, refusing to let me out of his sight. The CPS investigation expanded rapidly once they started digging into Victoria's past. She had been married before under her maiden name, Victoria Cambridge. She'd had 2 children from that marriage. Both had been removed by CPS in another state after multiple reports of severe emotional and physical abuse. Victoria had lost all parental rights, and her ex-husband had been awarded full custody after he documented years of her systematic mistreatment. She had moved states, changed her last name, and rebuilt her credentials without ever disclosing this history. When she met me, she presented herself as someone starting fresh with no baggage. Everything about our relationship had been built on lies. Christine showed me the case files from Victoria's previous children. The patterns were identical. Extreme discipline disguised as parenting, manipulation of authorities, gaslighting of the father, coaching children to lie. Victoria had refined her methods over years, and I had walked right into the trap. Why did no one catch this when we had kids together? Why is there not some kind of registry that would have flagged her? Christine looked tired and frustrated. The system is fragmented. Records do not always transfer between states, especially if someone changes their name. And Victoria was careful. She worked in family therapy and knew exactly how to present herself as rehabilitated if anyone did check her background. She had glowing references from colleagues who had no idea about her past. This is why documentation like yours is so critical. It creates an undeniable paper trail. The preliminary hearing happened 6 weeks after the initial CPS call. Victoria showed up with an expensive attorney and a carefully crafted image. She wore conservative clothes and minimal makeup. She had framed herself as a devoted mother who had made some mistakes in disciplinary approaches, but never intended harm. Her attorney argued that I had been exaggerating normal parenting conflicts because I wanted sole custody. He tried to paint the videos as taken out of context. The judge listened to both sides and reviewed the evidence. Then Lucas testified. My 11-year-old son sat in a courtroom and described 3 years of systematic abuse in painful detail. He described bleeding knees from kneeling on rice, freezing showers, being told he was worthless and would fail at life, being forced to lie to protect his mother. He described how Victoria had told him that if anyone found out about her discipline, his father would go to jail, and he and his siblings would be sent to foster care where terrible things happened to children. He had believed her because she was a therapist who understood how the system worked. The judge's expression grew increasingly severe as Lucas spoke. When Victoria's attorney tried to cross-examine Lucas and suggest he had been coached, the judge shut it down. This child is providing specific, detailed testimony that aligns with physical evidence and documentation. I am not going to allow you to traumatize him further by suggesting he is lying. The judge ruled that Victoria would have no contact with the children pending the criminal trial. She was charged with 3 counts of child abuse, 3 counts of child endangerment, and 1 count of fraud for hiding her previous CPS history. Her therapy license was suspended pending investigation by the state licensing board. She was allowed to post bail, but was fitted with an electronic monitor and forbidden from coming within 500 feet of our home or the children's school. The criminal trial happened 4 months later. The prosecution built their case around Lucas's testimony, my documentation, and the evidence from Victoria's previous family. They brought in her ex-husband who testified about the identical patterns of abuse he had witnessed and failed to stop quickly enough. He described how Victoria had manipulated therapists and social workers and made him feel crazy for thinking something was wrong. He described the relief he felt when his children were finally removed and how they had thrived once away from her. The prosecutor showed the videos I had recorded. The jury watched Victoria stand calmly while Lucas bled and Ava shook. They watched her coach the children on lies to tell doctors. They watched her threaten them with consequences if they told anyone the truth. Victoria's defense was that she had been trying to instill discipline in children who were becoming unruly. That her methods were unconventional but not abusive. That she loved her children and everything she did was for their benefit. Her attorney tried to argue that cultural differences in discipline should be considered. The prosecutor demolished that argument by pointing out that Victoria was not practicing cultural discipline. She was engaging in systematic torture of children while using her professional knowledge to hide it. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Victoria showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At sentencing, the judge allowed me to make a victim impact statement. I stood in front of the court and described watching my children transform from happy, engaged kids into anxious, terrified shells of themselves. I described the helplessness of knowing something was wrong, but having my concerns dismissed by professionals who believed Victoria's manipulations. I described the guilt of not being able to protect them sooner. My wife used her professional credentials and her intelligence to systematically abuse our children while convincing everyone around her that she was a devoted mother and I was an unstable husband. She coached our children to lie to protect her. She threatened them with consequences if they told the truth. She made them believe that abuse was love and that my attempts to protect them were signs of weakness. She did all of this knowingly and deliberately, and when she was finally caught, she showed no remorse. She still believes she did nothing wrong. I looked at Victoria sitting at the defense table. My children are in therapy, dealing with trauma that will affect them for years. They have nightmares. They struggle with trust. They question whether any adult actually has their best interests at heart, because the person who was supposed to love them most hurt them systematically. So I am asking this court to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. Not for revenge, but because my children need to know that what happened to them matters. They need to know that adults who hurt children face real consequences. They need to know they are safe. The judge sentenced Victoria to 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole, before serving at least 8 years. She also permanently terminated Victoria's parental rights and issued a lifetime restraining order preventing contact with the children even after her release. As Victoria was led away, she looked at me one final time, and I saw no recognition of what she had done, only anger that she had been caught. Lucas watched from the gallery where he sat with his siblings and a victim advocate. When the sentence was read, he started crying. Not sad tears, but tears of relief. Ava hugged him, and Ethan held my hand tightly. We left the courthouse together, and I felt like we could finally breathe. The following year was about healing and rebuilding. The children continued therapy and slowly started to trust again. Lucas's grades improved, and he rejoined activities he had abandoned during the worst of Victoria's abuse. Ava stopped having nightmares about ice water and started smiling more often. Ethan stopped wetting the bed and became more confident. We established new routines built on respect and communication instead of fear and control. I had to learn how to parent differently because I had been walking on eggshells around Victoria for so long that I had lost confidence in my own judgment. Dr. Osborne worked with me on setting appropriate boundaries and expectations while making sure the children knew they were safe and loved unconditionally. Ms. Whitmore, the school nurse who had filed the initial CPS report, became a family friend. She checked in regularly and advocated for additional support services for the children at school. I would never be able to fully express my gratitude to her for seeing what others had missed and being willing to file that report, even though it could have jeopardized her relationship with a parent. The state licensing board held hearings about Victoria's therapy practice and discovered she had been using similar manipulation techniques with some of her clients. Families came forward describing how Victoria had convinced them that problems in their homes were caused by enabling parents who did not enforce proper discipline. She had been teaching other parents to use the same abusive tactics she used on her own children, while presenting it as evidence-based therapeutic intervention. Her license was permanently revoked, and several families filed civil suits against her. The state also investigated how Victoria had been able to hide her previous CPS history and get licensed despite having lost parental rights in another state. They implemented new cross-state verification systems and mandatory reporting requirements for anyone applying for family therapy licenses. It would not fix the systemic failures that had allowed Victoria to hurt multiple families, but it might prevent the next person from doing the same thing. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Lucas asked if he could write her a letter. Dr. Osborne and I discussed whether this was healthy and decided to let him try if he wanted to. He spent weeks working on it in therapy sessions, crafting exactly what he wanted to say. The letter described how her abuse had affected him, how he still struggled with anxiety and nightmares, how he had trouble trusting adults who were supposed to take care of him, but it also described how he was healing. How therapy was helping him understand that her actions were not his fault, how his relationship with me had grown stronger, and how he had forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to anger was hurting him more than it was hurting her. He never sent the letter. Dr. Osborne explained that the purpose was not to give Victoria closure, but to help Lucas process his feelings. Writing it was enough. He kept it in a folder with the thought that maybe someday when he was older, he would decide whether she needed to read it. For now, it was just for him. 3 years after Victoria's conviction, on the anniversary of the day Ms. Whitmore filed the CPS report, I took all 3 children out for dinner at their favorite restaurant. We had established this as a tradition to mark the day their lives changed. Lucas raised his glass of soda in a toast. To Ms. Whitmore for being brave enough to report what she saw, and to Dad for not giving up, even when no one believed him. Ava and Ethan raised their glasses too, and we clinked them together. To being safe and being a real family. 5 years after Victoria's sentencing, I received a letter from her attorney requesting that I bring the children to visit her in prison. She claimed she had completed therapy programs and wanted to make amends. I showed the letter to Dr. Osborne, who helped me discuss it with the children. All three of them said no. They did not want to see her or hear her apologies. Lucas said it best. She had 8 years to be a good mom, and she chose to hurt us instead. I do not need her to apologize now that she is in prison. I need her to leave us alone. I wrote back to the attorney declining the visit and reiterating the restraining order that would remain in effect after Victoria's release. The children were now teenagers with their own lives and futures ahead of them. They did not need to be dragged back into Victoria's orbit for her benefit. Lucas graduated high school with honors and got accepted to college, where he planned to study psychology with a focus on child development. He said he wanted to understand what had happened to him and help other kids in similar situations. Ava became an advocate for child abuse prevention, speaking at schools about recognizing warning signs and reporting concerns. Ethan was quieter but steadier, finding healing through art therapy and expressing his experiences through painting. I remarried eventually to a woman named Rachel, who was patient and understanding about our family's history. She had been through her own trauma as a child and brought empathy and wisdom to our blended family. The children were cautious at first, testing whether she would hurt them, but Rachel proved herself over time through consistency and respect. We built something healthy together, something that looked nothing like the nightmare we had escaped. Sometimes people asked me if I had any regrets about how everything played out, about whether I wished I had acted sooner or done something differently. And I always came back to that moment in my kitchen when I applauded Ms. Whitmore's phone call. That applause represented years of trying to get help and being dismissed, years of documenting and gathering evidence while my children suffered, years of feeling helpless while Victoria manipulated everyone around her. When Ms. Whitmore finally broke through Victoria's facade and forced the system to pay attention, I applauded because it meant the nightmare was ending. It meant my children would finally be protected. It meant someone with authority had seen the truth and was willing to act on it despite the personal and professional risks. 7 years after Victoria was sentenced, I attended a conference on child protective services reform where I spoke on a panel about barriers to reporting abuse when the abuser is a licensed professional. I described how Victoria had used her credentials to manipulate the system and how difficult it had been to get anyone to look past her professional persona to see the reality of what she was doing. Other parents in the audience shared similar stories about doctors, lawyers, teachers, and therapists who abused their children while using their professional status to deflect suspicion. The system was slowly changing, but there was still so much work to do. After my panel, a young man approached me. He introduced himself as Daniel, one of Victoria's children from her first marriage. He was in his early 20s now and said he had been following the case against Victoria. He wanted to thank me for stopping her and protecting my children in a way his father had eventually managed, but not before years of damage. We talked for over an hour about our experiences, and the similarities were striking. Victoria had used identical tactics with both families. We exchanged information and stayed in touch. There was something healing about connecting with someone who truly understood what it had been like. 10 years after the CPS call, Lucas brought his girlfriend home to meet the family. Over dinner, she asked about his childhood, and he gave her the abbreviated version, about Victoria's abuse and the trial and the years of therapy and healing. She listened with tears in her eyes and then asked the question everyone always asked. "How did your dad finally get help for you?" Lucas looked at me and smiled. A school nurse saw bruises and filed a mandatory report, and my dad applauded when he found out because it meant someone finally believed what he had been trying to tell people for years. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He never gave up on us, even when the system failed. He kept documenting and fighting and trying to get someone to listen. And when Ms. Whitmore finally broke through, he made sure the investigators had everything they needed to protect us. He saved our lives by refusing to accept that what was happening to us was okay. I felt tears in my eyes and did not try to hide them. You saved yourselves by being brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered. All I did was make sure someone was listening. 15 years after Victoria's conviction, I received notification that she was being released on parole. She had served her minimum sentence, and the parole board determined she was no longer a threat. The restraining order remained in effect, and her parole conditions included mandatory therapy and no contact with any of her children from either marriage. I told Lucas, Ava, and Ethan about the release and gave them the option to request notification of her whereabouts. Lucas and Ava both declined. They had moved on with their lives and did not want to know where Victoria was or what she was doing. Ethan requested notification because he said he wanted to know if she ever moved close to where he lived, so he could be prepared. The parole officer assured us that Victoria's conditions were strict and any violation would result in immediate return to prison. She was required to attend therapy sessions focused on her disorder and was prohibited from working in any capacity with children. 3 months after her release, I received a call from her parole officer. Victoria had violated parole by attempting to contact one of her former therapy clients who had children. She was returned to custody to serve the remainder of her sentence. She would not be eligible for parole again. I felt relief, but also sadness that Victoria had learned nothing. Even after 12 years in prison and mandatory therapy, she was still trying to control and manipulate. She was incapable of change. Now, 20 years after that phone call from Ms. Whitmore, I look at my adult children and see survivors who became advocates. Lucas runs a nonprofit supporting families dealing with parental abuse. Ava trains mandatory reporters on recognizing signs of systematic child abuse. Ethan teaches art therapy to traumatized children. They took their pain and transformed it into purpose. And when people ask me about the moment everything changed, I always come back to the same answer. I applauded when the school nurse called CPS on my wife because that phone call represented validation after years of being dismissed. It represented intervention after years of helplessness. It represented the moment when the system finally worked the way it was supposed to work. That applause was not celebration of Victoria being caught. It was relief that my children would finally be safe. And that relief was justified because they survived and thrived and built lives free from fear. The applause echoed for 20 years and will echo for the rest of my life because it marked the day we started healing. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.